welcome to another episode of the Always Be Testing podcast. I'm your host, DeGrange, and I am really stoked to have Adam Fishman on today. Hey, Adam.
Hey, Ty. Excited to join you, and thanks again for coming on my pod. Talk about dad stuff. That was fun.
I had a blast talking to you about dad stuff. We had a great conversation.
We sure did.
Absolutely, man. Well, thanks for coming on here. Adam has some amazing accomplishments and has done some really amazing things in growth and product and performance marketing. I'm going to kind of run down your accomplishments and dive into things today with you. So Adam is the interim product and growth leader at Mozilla. Some of you may have well known the tech company. He runs his own very highly regarded newsletter, the Fishman AF newsletter. I got that right.
You did.
And I was able to join him on the Startup Dad podcast, which has had some awesome guests, and I highly recommend it. He was previously a EIR entrepreneur in residence at Reforge, which for those of you in growth, product, performance marketing, leadership, I highly, highly recommend. Probably the best framework, teaching, course, and community on growth, hands down. He was the chief product officer at Imperfect Foods. I feel kind of like I'm in Rocky, where Apollo's listing off all of his nicknames, and it's taking forever, and Rocky's like, "Okay, can we get to the end?" He was the VP of Growth at Wyzant, VP of Product and Growth at Patreon, head of growth at Lyft, and leading ecom for Shutterfly. How did we do? Do we capture it okay?
I did all of those things, and in the 10 years prior to that, I did a bunch of very helpful and beneficial things, but relatively uninteresting probably to your audience. So yeah, you hit the highlights.
That's amazing. If you want to talk briefly about the helpful, beneficial, maybe, or
yeah, sure. Well, I think the thing that sort of got me into growth and product was I thought I was going to be an engineer in college, and I was really math inclined, and I was very into science. And so I came out of high school and I was like, I'm going to be an engineer. It's very practical. I had a physician father, and I was like, I must do a practical career where I can get a job. And engineering seemed like the thing. And then I got into college. I went to the University of Michigan's engineering school, and I hated it. It took me like a semester. And I was like, no, this is not for me. So I ended up going into business, and then I focused on marketing, and I focused on finance, and I focused on corporate strategy and things like that. And but I had this like slight engineering brain about me. I like to build things. I like to tinker, even though I'm not like a master code writer or anything. And so I sort of navigated into the business side of building things, which brought me into marketing and then growth and then product management. And so I have this, ability to kind of communicate across the spectrum of all of the people involved in building a product. And I understand sort of enough about what they all do and what their roles are that I can kind of help shepherd that work. And so that's how I got into the space. It's just like, this is how I'm wired. And the beneficial things that I did was just a lot of individual skill building. So the first decade of my career was in working in roles of increasing responsibility and differentiated channel exploration and marketing, then applying a quantitative approach to marketing. It's sort of like when that was happening is when I was coming up in the world professionally. And so, and then this fascination with wanting to build things, it sort of just like bridged me into being a very T-shaped person. So again, a broad understanding of a lot of different things, all of the channels of marketing. Am I an expert in each individual one? I am not. But do I know enough about them to kind of like lead and apply? I do. And so that has been very helpful. And that's how I got in and how I thought about building my my career, was just bolting on skills and broadening my experience. And it's turned out to be very beneficial for me.
That's amazing. I love that. What a great answer. And then kind of similar to that, as you were, involved in tech and starting to get exposed to more of the business and performance marketing and into product and growth, what was that? Do you recall like a pivotal moment where you were like, hey, I really like this. I'm good at it. I'm going to keep kind of pursuing this path.
Yeah, I think my earliest job, I actually worked at the headquarters of a now bankrupt retailer that was part of Target. And then they were sold and they became part of like a private equity consortium and then steadily run into the ground, as is wont to happen sometimes with that world. And
Mm-hmm.
I think the one of the beautiful parts about working in that environment, not the private equity running into the ground part, but the retail area, was I got a really broad range of exposure. I did this rotational program through like every single facet of building, running, growing a retail business. And this is before direct to consumer DTC retail. This is like malls and like department stores and things like that.
Yeah.
And the moment that I had there was I got to work on their website and their media buying, and they were going through like a agency renegotiation and getting exposed to that. And this is back in like newspaper advertising, and online advertising was like pretty nascent, but just getting exposed to that and looking at like measuring it and seeing what was going to happen, like that was where I was like, ooh, I really like this. How do I do this and only this going forward? And then from there it was sort of meandering, but that was the thing that like put me onto the internet basically as a professional. Obviously been on the internet as a, consumer, but that was sort of the moment, and that was like the very beginning of my career, which was pretty exciting.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Was that kind of a contributing event in terms of how you ended up at Shutterfly?
Yeah, I think that set me on a path. I worked in retail, I worked in travel in a division of Expedia. Then I actually worked at a Shutterfly competitor. It was a very earlier stage startup, a company called Ophoto. And I worked in that like photo personalized product and services space, which was like ecom plus your own, plus sort of like the earliest parts of social media. I worked in that space for 5 years and helped rebuild a bunch of technology at Ophoto and got into experimentation, web experimentation and testing. And then kind of, I like to say that I sort of took a step up to the big leagues, and Shutterfly was a publicly traded company and like had much more revenue and things like that. And so all of that stuff sort of put me on that path. And that was pretty great, to build
I
things
love that.
at that
Yeah.
scale.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You kind of touched on your, engineering mind and how that's kind of helped you and just drilling down a little deeper on that. Were there times when you were going through that process of like getting involved in tech and rebuilding sites and helping out these businesses in your roles where you kind of drew upon that engineering brain and just kind of curious of how that kind of came up for you and how that played out.
Yeah, for sure. The earliest part of doing web experimentation, I was part of a team where I was sort of like the product manager and the engineer. So I mean, I was writing terrible front end code, I'm sure of it. But this predates, modern front end languages and things like that. And we didn't have a lot of resources, and I didn't have an engineer. And so as I was running experiments on the internet, I was doing the coding myself and deploying it through like our own CMS system and stuff like that. And so like tagging and you know, making adjustments to display how elements of a page were displayed and things like that. Like, and this predates things like Optimizely, even where you could kind of manipulate a page
Hmm.
with some not limited knowledge. Like I had to like learn how to do this, and I just did it. And it's kind of amazing that some of the companies of this size, like it's amazing that at Ophoto or and Kodak Gallery, like we were doing hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue, and I'm in there like tweaking the website and deploying it like myself through, you know, what was Offermatica and Adobe Test and Target at the time. Um, so I really had to draw on that engineering brain. I mean, I
Yeah,
wasn't like, you know, constructing arrays and things like that and like doing, you know, server side calls. It was all front end, but like that was a lot of the internet at the time. And so yeah, so that would,
that's
I would say,
awesome.
where I really drew on that kind of like tinkerer and just, you know, nobody else to help, so got to do it yourself kind of
Yeah, yeah.
approach.
Took ownership and bias for
Yeah.
action and all that fun stuff. I
Yeah.
love it. Um, kind of similar, career question around, what was the sliding door moment for you? One where you could have taken one path, chose another, learnings through it. I'm curious to learn more.
Yeah, I think there's a couple. There's a couple, but one was when I was leaving Kodak. I actually had two job offers. One was for Google down in Mountain View, and it was in this. There's sort of like ad tech division. They'd acquired a bunch of ad tech and ad optimization companies in the display advertising space, and they needed someone to like kind of be an analyst on one of those teams. It basically means you like work with customers and, you know, a little bit of account management, a little bit of like data analysis, like running people's ad campaigns. And, you know, it was Google. So you're like, oh, cool, Google, foot in the door. Like I went through their grueling interview process. I got the job. And so that was like one. And then the other one was to go to Shutterfly. And, you know, you're comparing Google and Shutterfly, and you're like, well, this is Google. But the reality is, like, I would have gone on a path of basically being an ad optimizer. And when I went to Shutterfly, I went down a path that was more like a general manager of a business unit. Like my job was to make the website more conversion oriented and drive more revenue. And I think it broadened the things that I would get to work on, as opposed to kind of really narrowing if I'd gone to Google. And now maybe I can't fast forward that other path, but I chose not to go to Google. I think they were paying me more money, and I said no. Um, and I chose not to go into like ad tech and ad optimization, and instead into something that ended up being more leadership oriented and more general management and more
Mm,
like entrepreneurial in a way.
love it.
And I think that made a huge difference. And it was a step in the direction that ended up taking me to Lyft or Zimride and then Lyft and things like that. And so that was probably the biggest pivot point and decision within my career trajectory.
That's one of my favorite answers to that question. It's such a great learning, and I think a great reminder to folks what an awesome path it's set you on, and a great transition. I mean, look at all the amazing growth and product roles you've had, and then through those, when you think about a growth team, like what do you think is you've obviously had a lot of reps leading large growth teams. You had a lot of learnings from the Reforge experience through all of it. What's the most important thing to ensure you have on a growth team, in your opinion?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I have this growth competency model framework that has 12 different dimensions and things like that that I've worked really hard to kind of create and socialize. I think though, if I zoom all the way out from individual skill building, um, the thing that kind of matters the most with growth is, I would say, more behavioral than individual skill. You can learn individual skills, right? If I'm motivated enough, I can learn data analysis. I can learn how to do research and talk to customers. I can learn how to do modeling and things like that. Like those are all things. There's enough internet material and coursework out there that you can teach yourself anything that you want. But you have to have that agency and motivation. And I think the thing that I've seen that separates really successful growth practitioners from, and I'm talking about like not individual, I do this one thing and I do this one thing really well. I'm talking about people that want to like lead and build a growth team and be able to do multiple facets. It really comes down to grit and high agency and intrinsic motivation. If you have those things, those behaviors, you can kind of do pretty much anything. And I know that's sort of generalizing and saying, like, well, those are important for any role. I think yes. And they're pretty important in growth because in growth and in product building, you get punched in the mouth a lot when it comes to zigging and zagging and getting failed experiments and you know getting things wrong, and you have to be able to just keep going and be able to like operate like a Roomba where it's sort of like, well, that didn't work, let's back up a few steps and let's go vacuum over here. Oh, that worked, we vacuumed up a lot of growth, awesome, let's do more of that. And so but there's a lot of you should not go into growth if you have a fear of failure, have a fear of being wrong, and have need somebody else to kind of tell you how to solve a problem. Which again, there is a role for people that have those kinds of behaviors. That's totally fine. I don't want to say that like everyone is like a super high agency like I do. Like you need a balance. But if you want to be long-term successful in growth, I think you have to have those behaviors because you have to be able to bolt on those additional skills. And so that would be my thing
Amazing.
with what's most important to have on your team. It's those high agency, determined individuals.
I love that. That's a phenomenal way to look at it. And kind of a similar related question. So, what are some of the things that you think people get wrong about growth teams?
Yeah, I wish that they didn't get this wrong in this day and age, but the function itself has not been around for that long. But I think the thing that most people get wrong is uh, the spaghetti at the wall strategy. And so they think that, well, a growth team is just a team that experiments with things. That's what they do. They experiment. And like today we have this idea and we go experiment. Tomorrow we have that idea and we go experiment. Um, that usually doesn't lead to success. And now I talked about the Roomba situation, but the thing about a Roomba is it always has purpose. The purpose is cleaning. And it might realize that it can't clean over here and it can't clean over there, but it can clean right here. That's sort of the role of growth. It's not just we're going to fling a bunch of things up in the air and see which one lands. You have to have a model and an approach for what matters. Are we focused on acquisition? Are we focused on retention? Are we focused on how we make money? And you have to point yourself and your team in those different directions and then narrow in where you're experimenting. And I think too often people are kind of like, well, today we're going to do this and tomorrow we're going to do this. And they're context switching across uh, different facets of growth because they don't have the model that grounds them in what are the most important areas that we should work on. And so I say I wish people didn't get this wrong still, but I see it happening where the growth team is just the team that runs fun experiments all day long, or the growth team is just the marketing team rebranded. And it really minimizes the strategy of growth and also the team dynamic of it with the multiple different parties participating and rowing together in the same direction against that strategy. So that's what I think a lot of people get wrong.
Yeah, this is a really big one, and it's a really good call out. I mean, is it how many companies do you think kind of fall into that category where they're not really, running a proper growth team. They're calling it growth when it's maybe not, or some of it's more spaghetti at the wall approach. Like, what's your
Yeah.
thought on that?
Um, it's hard for me to quantify, but I think it's probably still most companies, which is sad,
Yeah,
and unfortunate, but it I think it's the reality. And, again, my exposure is as an advisor where companies bring me in to help them with either building great product or building great growth functions, or sometimes both. And and so I'm biased towards people bring me in when they need some help. Um, but usually they bring me in to kind of help them accelerate something that's already working. And I say no to a lot of companies that don't have something that's working. And so I do still think it's the majority of businesses, um, that are still trying to get this right. And my evidence there is the number of people who subscribe to my newsletter, where I'm trying to teach them how to do this. I think if everyone had it all right, I wouldn't have a lot of subscribers. So that's kind of the thing. Um,
that's
so
awesome.
yeah, so that's my take on that.
I love it. That's awesome. I feel like we could go down that path for a really long time. Maybe a interesting thought around that is, as you're assessing opportunities, as people come to you with problems, you kind of reference like, okay, you don't have enough here, for me to, take this on and help. What are some of the variables that you look for in kind of, selecting winners for you in your situation in terms of what you're looking to help companies do?
Yeah. So earlier in my advisory work, I worked with a lot of companies that were pre product market fit. And what I realized is that, and they wanted growth support. They thought, oh, if we've got this thing, and if we just bring in an advisor, you can tell us how to grow it. And one of the frustrating aspects, that was sort of the first wave of my advisory practice many years ago. And I didn't know any better. And so I was like, sure, here I am. I'm going to help you. And I think one of the most challenging aspects of that for me was that you can do a lot of stuff when you are brought in that capacity, and none of it can work. And then the question that you have to ask yourself is it not working because it's the wrong tactic or the wrong strategy and I can fix that? Or is it not working because nobody wants this product? And when you work in pre product market fit companies and you try to apply growth strategies, it's often that second one. And you don't get any signal. You could be doing all the right things. And the reality is you just don't have product market fit. And so I caution people now, and I've learned myself on this, that if people want growth help, and again, I work with companies in earlier stage products and help them build products, it's a different motion than growth. I help them with their product market fit journey, but it's sort of recognizing whether a company's in that phase or not. From a growth perspective, there are two things that when somebody's like, hey, I need growth help, the two things that I usually ask them are, what is the state of your data infrastructure? And how are you growing today organically? Who is buying your product and why? And if the data infrastructure is a mess, and if they don't have any kind of organic growth or retention, they're probably pre product market fit or they're fooling themselves. And so I say no to a lot of those businesses. The biggest thing, I told this to somebody yesterday, the number one thing that kills a bad product is a great growth strategy. If you bring a bunch of people to a product that doesn't have product market fit, has poor retention, like you're going to put yourself out of business because all of those people are going to not like it. And then they're going to tell everybody else, don't bother. And so it's just a recipe for disaster. And so I look for those kind of indications that like we have a good product that people want and we know how to measure it. Maybe we need to tweak it, but like we're not starting from nothing. And the reality is like if you're hiring an advisor who's going to spend a minimal amount of time with you a week, you're not going to make that much progress. But you might need somebody that's more of like a hands-on consultant or contractor or an interim or fractional person to get you to the data infrastructure to get to help you see and find product market fit. And I just have to be very careful about what they're expecting from me and what the reality of the situation on the ground is. So those are a couple of things.
Yeah, nailed it. That's amazing. That's super helpful and definitely resonates 100%. Was there a resource that you stumbled across that really changed your perspective on something or made a big impression on you?
Yeah, I actually think I'd rather, there's a million professional books and things like that. And I've read tons of management books and things about building habits and like, all the, you know, culture of Amazon and culture of Netflix and like all that sort of stuff. I actually like that's fine, but I think a lot of people know the general takeaways from those books. And the thing that actually really changed my perspective on life was an article that I read from Tim Urban at Wait But Why uh, called Putting Time in Perspective. And he wrote this article like over a decade ago, but it was a visualization of the time that we have with people on the planet. And like, I think about this, I'm in my 40s. I think about this with my kids who are, approaching their teenage years. And I think about this with my own parents who are still alive, thankfully, but like, they're in their 70s or later. And you can visualize how many moments of time that you're going to have with those people for the rest of their lives. And I think about my parents in particular who don't all live near me in the San Francisco Bay Area, and the number of times and the number of in-person interactions that I have with them in a the rest of what I imagine would be their lives, even if I run it out to them hitting 100. And when you visualize that, it's very small. The number of times I see my parents, my dad, one time a year, maybe two times if I'm lucky, for some number of days. That is a very small number of times. Let's say he lives another 20 or 30 years. That's still only 20 or 30 interactions that I have with him left on the planet. And I think about that with my kids, my wife, and at the end of the day, it helped me change my perspective on like how much time to put into work and professional pursuits and how much time to put into personal pursuits and relationships and that sort of stuff. And it's not to say I don't work hard professionally. I do, right? It's the thing that pays me. And but in the grand scheme of things, visualizing the moments that you have with the people that matter is a very eye-opening experience. Even in a given
Yeah.
day, I probably spend less time with my kids than I do with my professional colleagues, and that's a somewhat sad thing to think about. And so anyway, that article, it's kind of like a two-part series. I think he wrote it and then refreshed it, but it visualizes time and moments of interaction. And it was super powerful. And it's something that I come back to a lot. I don't think I've read the article in a long time, but it's just stuck with me forever. And yeah, and so that's it.
It's
That's it.
amazing.
Putting time in perspective.
It's just looking at it and seeing the visual, it definitely hits you across the face to kind of understand like how much little time you actually do have. And yeah, I think it's a really good reminder to keep things in appropriate priority. And it's hard to do. It's hard to do, but I love that. Great answer. Um, and maybe, you talked a lot, I was on the Startup Dad pod with you. You've had some amazing conversations with dads. You're going through it yourself. Maybe what are some of the prouder things that you have just from your dad experience that you can share, or any ahas that you've had that you want to share with the audience?
Yeah, great question. I think like I have all the sort of regular proud dad moments. My son plays soccer and he scored 2 goals this weekend, and they were like highlight worthy goals. And he's 9 years old,
Yes.
and that doesn't happen that often. And they won the game 2-0. And I was like, oh man, that's so awesome. And the pride that I felt was actually seeing his reaction to doing something where he was so proud of that moment himself. I was like, oh, look at that. Look at how happy he is and excited. That's like a very nascent one. But I'm
That's
also,
amazing.
just as my kids get older, there's just a lot more experiences that you can have with them. And, I just talked to somebody on the pod about how you make memories with people and with your kids and your own parents. And a lot of it comes down to side by side experiences and just doing activities versus logistics. And I think when your kids are younger, and even when they get older, there's a lot of logistics that happen. But what I'm most excited for is experiences. So, like, we're taking our kids on a spring break adventure. This summer we're going. You can appreciate this. We're going to a dude ranch, and we're gonna like ride horses. Yeah, yeah. For those of you who don't know, you talked about growing up on a ranch in my pod. So like that's just fun
Love it.
stuff, and like we're all terrible at horseback riding. Like I wouldn't consider myself to be, a like Western, ranch person, but like so it kind of takes everyone down a peg, and we're all on equal footing, and that's just going to be really fun. And
That's amazing.
so like I'm excited about things that I can do like an equal with my kids, and not in like a, reporting relationship. And so that's what I'm most excited about. And of course I'm excited about like professional pursuits. I'm really excited about
Hmm.
the work that I'm doing with Mozilla. It's such a foundational company to the internet. And I think Mozilla is a really unique perspective and point of view on the future, especially the future of how people use technology. Um, but I'm excited for the memory making and things like that with my kids. And again, because when you put time in perspective, there's not that much of those moments left, especially not until they maybe
Yeah.
don't want to spend that much time with me anymore. So um,
Yeah.
I'm excited about
Take
that.
advantage.
Yeah.
That's amazing. What an awesome answer. I love that. Were there any maybe wrapping up the dad thought questions, but like you talked a little bit about learnings and mistakes and things like that. Was there other learnings from your kind of dad experience, or maybe recent ones that come to mind where you're like, huh, okay, I didn't kind of expect that. I have to kind of think about that as a dad, and kind of
Yeah. The number one, and I do not want to pretend that I am an expert on this at all. In fact, I get this wrong still all the time. The number one I've found is just how you model the things that you want your kids to do, or the way you want them to act. Kids are like a mirror. They are they when I get frustrated, it almost immediately translates to how my kids behave. And then I see that they get frustrated. And that's a hard thing to do as a parent. You have to like swallow it, or if you get frustrated, you have to revisit that with your kids pretty quickly and talk about what happened. And like, hey, I made a mistake. That's not how I wanted that situation to play out. Here's what I learned about it. Here's what I'm going to do differently, and like have that level of humility with your kids. And it's very humbling. Um, but that's all. Those are all teaching moments. And so I think like you would think about this as like, well, of course, that's kind of also what you want to do in a professional setting too. And those are just like the similarities and parallels between how you conduct yourself professionally and how you kind of teach and conduct yourself personally with your family is there's so much overlap in that Venn diagram. But that has been my number one learning as a dad and as a professional person, is that you have to uh, conduct yourself in a way that where kids can learn from osmosis and other people can learn from osmosis. And kids are much more attentive than you think. They are paying attention, especially as they get older, to everything, every minor thing that you do. And so like that's a pretty big responsibility. Um so that's been my most significant learning as a dad. Um
Amazing.
yeah. Yeah, that's
Love
been
it.
it for me.
Love it. Definitely seeing the kiddos very much just mirror so much of what you do and what I do. It's spot on. Um, we talked a little bit about, some awesome dad learnings, some awesome growth learnings. You've also had the opportunity to advise some amazing companies. We talked about kind of building early stage. Um, what are some startups that you think are worth maybe noting or keep an eye out for?
Yeah. Um One of the companies that I think is like the best kept secret, even though they've got hundreds of thousands of members and things like that, is this company that I advise called Trusted House Sitters. And it's not like the shiniest, AI powered whatever. Those are cool, but like when you think about practically useful things, so what this business is it's sort of the intersection of Airbnb and Rover. So if you own a pet, which feels like almost everyone on the planet owns a pet, um, you can become a member, a paying member of this company. And other people who may own pets themselves or just generally love pets can also become a paying member. And then they will come and stay in your house and take care of your pets while you are traveling. And no other money changes hands. It is like having a free pet sitter. And the benefit to those folks is they get to travel and they get to stay somewhere in the equivalent of an Airbnb for free. And so I mean, I shouldn't say it's completely free. Each side pays, a marketplace membership fee, but it's like a couple $100. That is so cheap. It's
Wow.
amazing. And the vetting of the network and sort of the trust that's established there, like, it's pretty powerful. And so
Yeah.
if you've ever traveled and like hired a pet sitter, um, you will spend way more than $200 for, a handful of days. And so
Yeah.
there's people on both sides of the marketplace. There are travelers who literally just go and live in different parts of the world, like retirees, couples,
Amazing.
professional nomads and things like that. And they will just go and live in people's
Yeah.
houses and like live like a local, like Airbnb talks about, but they don't have to pay anything. They just live there and they take care of your pet. And that's the quid pro quo. And then there are other people who like travel all the time and they know that they like have people who are well vetted and like trusted, and they will come and stay in
Yeah.
their house and take good care of their animals. And like that's pretty
Yeah.
cool. That's a very
Yeah.
cool thing. Yeah.
I
So
love that.
it
Wow. That's
yes.
awesome.
So if you're a pet owner or a traveler, like I say it's a best kept secret because like everyone on the planet should be using this product.
Heck
And it's
yeah.
still, they're still not as widely known as I think, I wish they were, but they're working
Yeah.
on it.
Yeah.
It's
I
great. It's a great service.
definitely want to look into it, and I feel like there's a ton of people that don't know about it that would just be all about this. So I think I
Yes.
could definitely, hopefully, some folks listening are like, "Oh, I'm gonna try that out." That's
Oh,
amazing. I love it.
100%. Yeah.
Heck yeah. Heck yeah. Um, what's something fun, interesting that folks might not know about you, Adam?
Well, let's see. There's probably a lot. One is that for the entirety of my life, pretty much, I have been an ice hockey player. So, which in California, and I've lived in California now for 20 years, but like that used to be a pretty significant novelty. It's becoming less as like youth hockey and stuff develops in California, but I'm from the Midwest, from Michigan, where it's freezing cold, 6 months of the year. And so I grew up in the earlier days of kind of the rise of youth hockey in Michigan. And so, but I played at a pretty competitive level. I was the captain of my high school team, like one in all, like I was like an all state hockey player in high school.
Nice.
And I still play as an adult, and I'm admittedly a little less than I used to because,
Yeah,
most of the activity for men's hockey happens on the weekends, for me at least, and like my kids have stuff. And so, but I still play, and like it helps me find friends outside of the tech industry. Most of the guys that I play
absolutely.
with are not from the Bay Area. They're from the East Coast, the
Nice.
Midwest, Canada, et cetera. And so it's just, I love that sport, and I can see myself playing it for the entire rest of my life. And, you know, it's like, it's an interesting and different hobby and pastime that I have than I
Yeah.
think a lot of people in California. So
Heck yeah.
that's a thing. That's a thing that I do.
I love that, man. I love that. And I think it's like I've tried to maintain that, involvement in sports. And I think it's something I really enjoy myself and in different ways. And I think a lot of people in the US, they'll play really competitive when they're young. And then it's like, it's done. It's like never pick it up again, never. Whereas I feel like in other cultures, it's a little bit more encouraged to kind of like as an adult, stay active and
Yeah.
playing like, club football, soccer, rugby, tennis, something that's like, and it's so healthy to keep moving and, probably good for mental and social and good outlet. So that's amazing. You must have met some great people through that and have a lot of fun. And
Yeah. It actually, when I moved to the Bay Area 20, almost 20 years ago now, it's going to be 20 years in a few months. I didn't have kids yet. The very first thing that I did, I already had my job lined up and things like the very first thing that I did was I found a hockey rink to play in.
there it
And
is.
there is one in Oakland, in downtown Oakland. And it actually has two rinks, one of them an Olympic sized ice rink and the other one an NHL
Amazing.
sized ice rink. So it's amazing that, like, in the city of Oakland, there is a double ice rink that like doesn't exist in a lot of other places. But that was my number one priority. And I made a bunch of lifelong friends right when I first moved here because of that experience. So
Love it.
yeah, so
Amazing.
that's been really, really great for me.
You ever been up to the Snoopy ice rink up in Santa Rosa?
I have been to the Snoopy ice rink. I have not played in the Snoopy tournament, but I know many
Hmm.
people who have. But yeah, I've definitely been there in Santa Rosa. That's in your
Love
old
it.
backyard.
Yep, that's right. That's right. You'll have to add it to your bucket list.
I will, for sure.
It's been awesome, awesome, and amazing learnings and conversation as always. So appreciate. Where can folks find you if they want to learn more?
Oh, I do not hide on the internet, so I'm pretty easy to find. I would say LinkedIn is probably the primary place that I post and interact. So LinkedIn, you can search for Adam Fishman on LinkedIn. My newsletter is the Fishman AF newsletter.com. I am blessed with fun initials that I can, manufacture to make a funny newsletter name. Um, so that's sort of the second one, the Fishman AF newsletter. And then the third way is if you're a parent, you should listen to the Startup Dad podcast. My goal with that show, it's a labor of love. I don't make money from it. It's actually more of a cost center for my life than a revenue generator. But my goal with it was to have more conversations with men who are recognizable in business and in technology companies and other companies, but not talk to them about work. Talk to them about parenting and normalize that conversation. And it's been really fun and really eye-opening. And I've had different conversations with people that I've known for a really long time, but I've only known them professionally. And so, and there's some decent advice on there too from time to time. So, yeah, so that's a third way is to, subscribe and listen to the Startup Dad podcast.
I couldn't I couldn't recommend it more, and I'm also really excited to dive more into the newsletter. There's some awesome product learnings on there, so I'll definitely be doing that as an existing subscriber. I'd like to
Thank
add.
you. Yeah. Awesome.
Adam, thank you, man. This has been amazing. Have an awesome rest of your day, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks. You too, Ty.